Well, peanut butter in your greens, I think that sounded a little bit unusual to me, but I recently attended a phenomenal culinary workshop or training with, featuring cuisines from around the world. And in Southern Africa, peanut butter is used in so many dishes, and it is absolutely fabulous added to greens. Hi, I'm Judy Matusky, and I am a culinary nutritionist as well as a registered dietitian with Athens Nutrition. And I'm going to bring you this really simple 4-ingredient dish that I think is going to really elevate greens. We all should be eating greens more frequently. Many of us do not, but this might be a way for you to entice even maybe some of the most skeptical family members to try their greens. All right, I'm going to go ahead. I have my pot on. I'm just using a pretty large Dutch oven because we are going to use a lot of greens and we need to really cook them down. So I want to get this water kind of coming up to a little bit of a boil, and then we're going to steam the greens. Now, traditionally, turnip greens would be something that would be used, collard greens. I was at the market and I was having a little bit of a hard time finding a lot of different types of greens. So I'm actually using endive, which I absolutely love. It is a little bit on the bitter side, but some greens are, and that's fine. So I found these, and that's what I'm going to use. Not quite as traditional, though. What was really interesting when I was taking this training is that apparently pumpkin leaves are really traditionally used in a lot of Southern African cuisine. I have never thought to use pumpkin leaves, and apparently they're supposed to be really delicious, especially if you pick the leaves that are tender. I've never seen them sold. They may be sold in different farmers markets, but I'm going to be on the lookout for them. We don't typically grow pumpkins in our garden, so I don't really have access to those types of leaves, but just sounded really interesting. Okay, I'm going to turn this up. So what we're going to do is I added about a little over a cup of water to this, and we are going to just steam up the greens. So I really want to get this water coming up to a little bit of a boil. It's going to cook down pretty quickly. I'm going to add, maybe a half of a teaspoon of salt. You can regulate that as you please. And you take the greens, whatever greens you're using, and you're going to chop them or chiffonade them, depending on how you want to break up the greens. But you definitely want them to be a little bit more bite-sized. So I already took these and I chopped them. Again, this is endive, but any dark leafy green would work. There is not one that wouldn't. Spinach would work, kale would work. If you have access to things like mustard greens or collards that look really good in the market, they would work. It's about 8 cups of greens. Now the recipe has specific amounts on the rear. When I cook something like this, I'm not usually following the amounts, but it's give or take about 8 cups. And so I'm going to get these going now. To add just a little bit more element of flavor, we're going to add, I used about a half of a sweet onion. I think the recipe says half a cup or quarter of a cup. Again, I'm using probably a little bit more than a half of a cup, but you're just going to sprinkle those right on top. And then at the same time, you're going to add some tomato. And it's not really tomato season. You could use canned tomatoes in this. I just usually when I'm buying fresh tomatoes out of season, I almost always buy plum tomatoes. I think they're probably the best you can get, other than maybe like the cherry tomatoes or grape tomatoes. If you really want to cook with fresh tomatoes, you could certainly use canned. I just chopped these up. Again, this is maybe a cup of tomatoes. I think the recipe might say half of a cup. And then they just go on top. And we're going to get this, I'm going to crank this up a little bit because I really want this to steam relatively quickly. We can see it's already really pretty with the green and the red and the white onion. I'm going to put the lid back on. And then we're just going to let that steam up, a little bit as we're just kind of waiting. We're going to go in and just use some tongs, and we'll flip those around. Now, the peanut butter is really what's going to create the sauce. All right. So I have about 2 tablespoons of a natural peanut butter that I'm going to be adding here. You could stray from tradition, and you certainly could use almond butter. You could use tahini. You could use a sun nut butter if there's an allergy issue with nuts. So you can, but the traditional butter is peanut butter, and peanuts, peanut butter, peanut oil, very, very traditional and used in a lot of different recipes and foods in Southern Africa. So we're going to do the same, and I'm just going to use a natural peanut butter. And what you're doing is, I know that a lot of times you're not necessarily cooking your vegetables in water because you've been told not to, because any, water soluble vitamins can leach out into the water. And then if you're, using the vegetables, eating the vegetables, you are losing a lot of those nutrients into the water. What's great about this is we're capturing everything. So nothing is being wasted. So we're steaming the greens in some water, but we're gonna also then use that water to create this peanut butter sauce, all right? So I'm gonna go ahead and take the lid off. Now, the presenter who did this as part of the culinary training, she really, really cooked her greens down. And that probably is very traditional, so that the greens get really, really soft. There's not, I think we tend to, sort of are used to our vegetables having, a little bite to them, or, a little crunchiness or texture. But she really cooked them way down. So I'm gonna, you can see. Look, I'll just show you. Well, I guess you can see it already. But that was brimming with greens before I put the lid on, and you can see how. I'm gonna turn the heat up because I do want this to kind of boil. You can see how it just dropped and cooks down. That's just always what happens with greens. Okay, so I'm gonna let this continue just to cook down just a little bit more. And we will use the water. So we're going to use the water to create the sauce. So we're capturing any water-soluble vitamins, particularly B vitamins or vitamin C. Those vitamins tend to be water-soluble. They can leach out of the vegetables and it would go into the water, but we're capturing that water. So we are not, and we're going to use that for the sauce, as I said. That liquid that's at the bottom when you're cooking either beans or vegetables, it's typically referred to as the pot liquor. So it kind of has that wonderful flavor just from the vegetables themselves. All right, so this is cooking down. I would probably continue to cook this for maybe even another, 5 minutes or so. But I just want to show you the sauce real quick. But what I'll do is what typically you want to do, because you kind of want to blend the peanut butter into the water, and it's a little easier if you just sort of pull out a fair amount of the greens and the other vegetables in here, just so that you're left with mostly just the water at the bottom. It doesn't matter if there's some, you're leaving a lot of some of these vegetables behind. It just makes it a little easier to thin down the peanut butter. And you want the sauce. Now here's the thing. I started with about a cup of water. And that's going to vary, if you start with a cup of water and it looks like that it's too watery after you add the peanut butter, you've got a couple of options. You can then just, if it's too watery, you can just reduce it and it'll get thicker as the water reduces, or you could just add a little bit more peanut butter. So I'm using about 2 tablespoons for that amount of greens. If you really want your sauce to be even more peanutty, you can certainly use more. But I'm going to just use the 2 tablespoons. Last couple times I made that, I felt like 2 tablespoons really worked well for making a nice thick sauce. So all you're doing now is just using your spoon just to break up that peanut butter so it actually starts to form its own little sauce. And with the water, and again, we are using everything. So we're capturing the water, we're not pouring that water off. We're using it to create the broth, so we are capturing back any vitamins that might have been leached out into the water. Okay, so this sauce, I'm just going to show it to you right now. This sauce is a little on the thinner side. The endive that I used, it might have put out more water than, I think the first time I made it, I think I actually used mustard greens because I found some really good mustard greens when I was out. So it really just depends. So let me just show you this. These handles get a little bit warm. That it is a little on the thinner side right now. So I'm gonna let that, let me see if you can see it, okay. I'm gonna let this kind of boil down just a little bit. But what you wanna do, again, it's the consistency of it. You kind of want this sauce to get thick enough that it really does coat the greens. I'm going to go ahead and add my greens back in because I could have cooked them a little bit longer before I even pulled them out of the water. So I'm going to put them back so that they're just going to kind of continue to break down a little bit in the peanut butter sauce. And that way, as this sauce thickens, the greens are going to continue to break down a little bit. And again, because the greens really do get really soft. Now, how to serve this would be, the traditional way to serve this is with something called sadza, which is cornmeal, whole grain cornmeal that's cooked for a while. It was kind of a process to really get the cornmeal to the texture. It's not, similar in a way of making polenta, but you're cooking it even longer, and there's a real trick to how you cook and stir that cornmeal in the pot. It gets very, very thick to the point where it can be formed almost, it's shaped into like a little ball or the shape of like a football. And that's served on the plate with the greens. The presenter who did this did a fabulous job. It was really interesting. She made something else with it called chakalaka, which is a mixture of a whole bunch of vegetables, and you actually then add a can of like baked beans to it. So she served this with this cornmeal salsa, which was used as sort of a vehicle to, you sort of broke off a piece of the salsa and you kind of dipped it in with the greens and you dipped it in with this chakalaka, the beans and vegetables. And that was the complete meal. And I love that because, again, there's no animal protein in here. And when you're adding peanut butter to vegetables like this, what you're really doing is you are increasing a little bit of the protein value. You're increasing some heart healthy plant fats. You're making the vegetables a little bit more satisfying and sustainable. There's a little bit more to them. And so they can start to become part of, almost become the meal. So when this is served with, I was thinking about that. I thought if you aren't making the sadza, which would be traditional, you could make polenta. You could certainly do that. You could do things that are a little less traditional, maybe other type of a grain. They used sorghum a lot also as a grain to make like that kind of similar cornmeal salsa. And you could use quinoa, you could use brown rice, you could use other whole grains as well. But I think the addition of beans is nice. So if you're not making that other side dish with that would have the beans in it, you could add beans to this, or you could serve it with beans. You could serve it with beans and rice. You could, we're kind of mixing up, culinary cuisines here, our cultural cuisines, but you can kind of make it your own. So, all right, so this is really kind of coming together. Let me just show you this. It's boiling down, and I'm going to turn the heat down a little bit here. It's really getting thicker, and I'll probably let this go maybe a couple more minutes just to get that sauce even thicker so that it really coats the greens and the onions and the tomatoes. It smells so good. It just smells so nutty. It really is a nice flavor combination. And again, so I think this would be really a fun thing to do if you're not used to adding something like a peanut butter to your greens, and it might be a really fun way to make them something a little more interesting. I might even encourage your kids, if they don't have a peanut allergy, to be able to try their greens. So again, give it a try. Please let me know if you do. I always love your comments, and thanks so much for a lot of you reaching out and giving me some suggestions and giving me some feedback on how these recipes are working for you. If you need any additional nutrition support, we are always here at Athens Nutrition to meet with you one-on-one. We do that virtually, so we can meet with you anywhere across the state of Pennsylvania. If you're needing to lower your cholesterol or manage your blood sugar, or if your weight is just a little bit in the range where it maybe is impacting your health, or if you're just really wanting to learn how to cook a little bit easier, faster, healthier, and you're just not sure where to start, we are available to do that, and we can meet with you, and we can meet with you virtually, so it's really convenient. You can be in your kitchen, and I can be in mine, and we can chat not only about your nutritional goals, but also about maybe some cooking. So always reach out at athensnutrition.com. I will see you next week. Take care.